worked the front desk at a small hotel for 3 years. It was not a famous hotel or an especially old one. It stood beside a motorway outside of town. Most people only visited because they were passing through. We had 48 rooms, a breakfast area, a small bar that closed at 11, and a car park that was almost always half empty. Most nights were predictable. Late arrivals, forgotten keycards, guests asking for extra towels or complaining that the heating was too warm. I worked the overnight shift twice a week, from 11 in the evening until 7 in the morning. The incident happened in February, during a week when the hotel was unusually quiet. The display showed room 206. When I answered, nobody spoke. I could hear something on the other end, not breathing exactly, but the soft background noise of an open telephone line. I said hello several times. After perhaps 10 seconds, the call ended. Calls like that happened occasionally. Guests would knock the handset from its base, or children would press buttons. I checked the reservation system to see who was staying in room 206. The room was listed as vacant. I assumed there was a fault with the telephone system. I made a note for the morning manager and continued working. About 20 minutes later, the lift came down from the second floor. The doors opened, but nobody stepped out. I could see directly into the lift from the front desk. It was empty. That also did not concern me. Guests sometimes pressed the wrong button or sent the lift away while loading luggage. Old lifts behave strangely. There are explanations for these things. At 2:05, the front desk telephone rang again. Room 206. This time someone spoke. It was a man's voice, quiet, tired, and difficult to hear. He asked what time breakfast started. I told him breakfast began at 6:30. There was a pause. Then he asked whether his wife had arrived. I asked for his name so that I could check. He gave me the name Daniel Mercer. I searched the reservation system. There was no Daniel Mercer staying at the hotel. There was nobody with that surname anywhere on the guest list. I asked whether he was certain he was in room 206. He said he was. I told him there appeared to be a problem with his reservation and asked him to come to the front desk with his key card so that I could resolve it. He did not answer immediately. Then he said, "I don't think I should leave the room." The call ended. I contacted the other employee working that night, a security guard named Peter. We went upstairs together. Room 206 was at the end of the second floor corridor. The corridor lights were automatic, turning on section by section as we walked. The final section, directly outside room 206, did not turn on. Peter used his flashlight while I knocked. No one answered. I knocked again and announced that we were hotel staff. Still nothing. Peter unlocked the door with his MasterCard. The room was empty. The bed had been made. The towels were folded. There was no luggage, no clothing, and no sign that anyone had entered since housekeeping had cleaned it. The telephone was on the bedside table with the receiver in place. I picked it up. There was no dial tone. Peter checked the cable and found that it had been disconnected from the wall. We returned downstairs and reviewed the hallway cameras. Nobody had entered or left room 206 that night. In fact, nobody had walked through the second floor corridor after 11:40. The telephone did not ring again. The next morning, the manager called the company responsible for maintaining the phone system. A technician examined the room and found no fault that could have caused the calls. He also confirmed that a disconnected telephone could not contact the front desk. I asked the manager whether a man named Daniel Mercer had ever stayed at the hotel. She searched the older booking records. He had. Daniel and his wife had stayed in room 206 7 years earlier. They had been traveling home when Daniel became ill and decided he could not continue driving. His wife left the hotel shortly after midnight to find an open pharmacy. While she was gone, Daniel suffered a heart attack. He died in room 206 before she returned. I worked at the hotel for another 9 months. The room was occupied many times during that period, and nothing unusual was ever reported. but whenever I worked overnight, I watched the telephone display. Room 206 never called again. Sometimes I wonder whether Daniel knew his wife had eventually returned, or whether in whatever moment he remained trapped, he was still waiting for her to arrive. My father drove buses for almost 20 years. For the final 6 years of his career, he worked an evening route connecting several small villages with the nearest railway station. His final journey began shortly after midnight and usually carried only a few passengers. Drivers were required to inspect the bus at the end of every route. They checked beneath the seats, collected lost property, and made sure nobody had fallen asleep before driving the empty bus back to the depot. One night in November, my father completed his final stop at 12:47. 3 passengers had traveled on the last part of the route. He remembered them because they boarded separately and sat in different sections of the bus. All 3 got off at the railway station. My father watched them leave through the front door. He then closed the doors and began driving towards the depot. About 5 minutes later, the stop request bell sounded. He looked in the interior mirror. A man was sitting near the back of the bus. My father assumed he had missed him during the final stop. It was possible the man had been lying across the seats or sitting somewhere hidden from the mirror. He pulled over at the next safe location and opened the doors. The man did not move. My father called back and told him that the route had ended. The man stood slowly. He appeared to be in his late 60s and wore a dark coat that looked wet, although it had not rained that night. He walked halfway down the aisle and stopped. Then he asked, "Does this still go past Bell's Crossing?" My father told him Bell's Crossing had not been part of the route for years. The old bus stop there had been removed after the road was widened. There was no longer a safe place for buses to stop. The man looked towards the window. He said it stopped there when I got on. My father explained that this was the final journey and asked where the man wanted to go. The passenger did not answer. Instead, he sat in the nearest seat. My father contacted the depot and explained that he still had someone aboard. The dispatcher told him to bring the passenger back to the station, where security could help arrange transportation. My father turned the bus around. During the return journey, he kept checking the mirror. The man remained in the same seat, facing forward. At one point, they passed the road that had once led to Bell's Crossing. The passenger turned his head and watched it disappear behind them. When my father reached the station, 2 security officers were waiting. He opened the front and rear doors. The officers entered the bus. The man was gone. They searched every seat and checked the emergency exit. None of the doors had opened during the journey. My father would have heard the alarm if anyone had used the emergency release. The security officers assumed my father was exhausted. My father knew what he had seen. The following day, he asked an older driver about Bell's Crossing. The driver remembered the former stop and told him why it had been removed. 15 years earlier, before my father worked that route, a passenger had stepped off the final bus at Bell's Crossing and attempted to cross the road. A car struck him in the darkness. The passenger died before an ambulance arrived. My father asked for the man's name, then searched old newspaper archives at the local library. The article included a photograph. My father recognized the dark coat first. Then he recognized the face. He drove the same route for another 2 years. After that night, whenever he passed the old road to Bell's Crossing, the stop request bell would sometimes sound. It happened only on the final journey. My father never stopped there, but he always slowed down. I worked in the administration department of a distribution warehouse. The building operated 24 hours a day, with hundreds of employees rotating between morning, afternoon, and overnight shifts. Because of the number of temporary workers, it was normal to see people you did not recognize. Every employee was issued an identification badge. The badge opened the main entrance and recorded the time they entered and left. If somebody forgot their badge, security could issue a temporary one after confirming their identity. One Monday morning, I received an email from a supervisor asking me to correct an employee's attendance record. The employee was listed as Thomas Vale. According to the electronic system, Thomas had entered the warehouse at 10:56 every night for the previous 14 nights. There was no record of him leaving. The system therefore calculated that he had worked continuously for more than 300 hours. Mistakes like that usually happened when an employee forgot to scan out. What made this case unusual was that Thomas Vale did not appear in our personnel database. There was no employment contract, payroll number, address, or emergency contact. I assumed the badge had been assigned to the wrong name. I contacted security and asked them to check the badge number. They told me the number did not exist. It fell outside the range used by our building. Still, the entrance system showed the badge being accepted at exactly 10:56 each night. Security reviewed the camera footage. At 10:56 on every recording, a man approached the employee entrance. He wore the same reflective jacket as the warehouse staff and carried a small black lunch bag. The camera angle did not clearly show his face. We checked the internal cameras to find out where he went after entering. Each night, he walked through the changing area and entered warehouse section 100. He never appeared on another camera. Section 100 was used for returned products and damaged stock. Only a small team worked there overnight. The section supervisor said he did not know anyone named Thomas Vale. We showed him a still image from the security footage. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said he had seen the man before. He had assumed the man belonged to the maintenance team because he never spoke to anyone. Several workers remembered seeing him standing at the far end of an aisle, usually shortly before 11:30. Nobody remembered watching him leave. Security decided to wait for him the following night. At 10:50, 2 guards stood inside the employee entrance. Another waited outside. The entrance was locked so that every arriving worker had to be admitted individually. At 10:56, the scanner produced its usual confirmation sound. The system recorded Thomas Vale entering the building. Nobody was standing at the door. The outside guard saw no one approach. The inside guard saw the door remain closed. At 11:23, an employee in section 100 radioed security. He said there was a man standing at the end of aisle 14. The camera showed the 2 guards entering the aisle from one side. A 3rd guard approached from the opposite side. For several seconds, a figure could be seen between the shelves. Then the image became distorted. When it cleared, the aisle was empty. The guards found the black lunch bag on the floor. Inside was a metal flask, a folded newspaper, and an employee badge carrying the name Thomas Vale. The badge was old and badly damaged. The company logo printed on it had not been used in more than 20 years. Management searched the archived personnel records. Thomas Vale had worked at the warehouse when it first opened. He was employed on the overnight shift in section 100. 6 months after starting, he failed to return home from work. His wife reported him missing. His badge recorded him entering the warehouse at 10:56 that night. There was no record of him leaving. Police searched the building, but Thomas was never found. The warehouse continued operating while the investigation took place. Over time, the case was forgotten by everyone who had not known him personally. Section 100 was temporarily closed after we found the lunch bag. A specialist team inspected the walls, ventilation system, and drainage spaces. They found nothing. The badge was given to the police. After that, the electronic records stopped showing Thomas entering the building. Several months later, warehouse section 100 was renovated. Behind one of the old storage racks in aisle 14, workers discovered a narrow service door. It had been covered during an earlier expansion and did not appear on the current building plans. Behind it was a concrete maintenance passage. The passage ended at a locked door leading outside. It contained no human remains. There was only a reflective work jacket hanging from a pipe. Beneath it sat a small black lunch bag. The security manager insisted it could not have been the same one. The original bag was still being held as evidence. The second bag was empty except for a folded piece of paper. On it was a handwritten message consisting of 4 words. I forgot to leave. The warehouse is still operating. Section 100 is still used for returned products. Employees working overnight say that the badge scanner occasionally makes a confirmation sound at 10:56, even when nobody is near the entrance. The system no longer records a name. It simply registers an unidentified employee entering the building. There is still no record of anyone leaving,